Hello there, and welcome back to a place where science meets the quiet. Tonight, we are not going to rush. We are going to wander, slowly, gently, through one of the most astonishing frontiers in all of modern research. A place where the boundary between what you think and what your body does has begun to dissolve like morning frost in sunlight. This is the science of mind over matter, not as a slogan, not as a motivational poster on the wall of a gymnasium, but as a measurable, testable, peer-reviewed phenomenon that keeps showing up again and again in brain scanners and blood draws, in immune markers and nerve recordings, in the bodies of people who believed something hard enough that their biology had no choice but to listen. Your experience of reality is not a direct recording of the world. It is a construction, a best guess assembled by a 3-pound organ that has never once seen sunlight. Here is the thread that runs through everything you are about to hear. Your experience of reality is not a direct recording of the world. It is a construction, a model, a best guess assembled by a 3-pound organ that has never once seen sunlight, that has never directly touched anything, that has only ever received electrical signals and chemical whispers, and from those alone, it builds the entire universe you live inside. And because experience is constructed, it can be reconstructed. Because the model can be updated, suffering can sometimes be reduced. Because the body is always listening for signals from the brain can, under the right conditions, change what the body does. That is what we are exploring tonight. We will travel through 10 chapters, each one a door into a different room of this extraordinary house. We will meet the inner pharmacy that opens when you believe hard enough. We will walk the Vegas highway that connects your emotions to your gut. We will sit with phantom limbs and ask what the brain means by the word mine. We will learn why pain is an opinion, not a fact. We will listen to the whispers that stress sends into your immune cells. And then, at the very end, we will arrive somewhere quiet, somewhere the body can rest, somewhere the mind, having wandered through so much wonder, can finally let go. So, let your shoulders fall, let your jaw unclench, let your eyes grow heavy if they want to, and let us begin. There is something your brain does every single second of every single day. Something so automatic, so fast, so deeply woven into the machinery of perception that you have almost certainly never noticed it happening. Your brain guesses. Before a single photon has fully registered on your retina, before a sound wave has finished its journey through the fluid of your inner ear, before a fingertip sensation has completed its climb up the spinal cord, your brain has already written a first draft of what is probably there. Scientists call this predictive processing, and it is, in the most literal sense, the architecture of your reality. Here is how it works. Your brain is not a passive recorder. It is an active predictor. Right now, as you listen to these words, your brain is not simply waiting for information to arrive and then processing it. It is running a continuous simulation, a kind of rolling forecast of what the world is most likely to contain. When sensory information finally arrives, it does not get processed from scratch. It gets compared to the prediction. If the match is close, the brain accepts the prediction as reality and barely registers the incoming data at all. Only the errors, the gaps between expectation and experience, Get actively updated. The result is a perception that is part incoming signal, part internal story, and the proportion shifts more than most people realize. Think about the last time you were in a crowd and heard someone call what sounded like your name. Your head turned, your attention sharpened. Your heart rate may have ticked upward. And then you realized it was a different word entirely, perhaps a different name, perhaps just a syllable that your brain, primed by the social salience of your own identity, shaped into something personally meaningful. Your brain heard what it expected to hear. It built the experience from expectation, and the raw sensory data, which told a different story, barely got a seat at the table. This is not a flaw. This is the system working exactly as designed. The brain's predictive machinery is extraordinarily efficient. By running a forecast, the brain can respond to the world at speeds that straightforward stimulus response processing would never allow. By updating only on errors, it saves enormous metabolic energy. The entire architecture is a solution to a fundamental problem. The world is too complex and too fast to process from scratch every moment. So the brain learned to template match, to say, based on everything I know, this is probably what is here, and I will act accordingly. But here is where the science becomes something more than elegant engineering. Here is where it becomes personal. Because if your brain constructs your experience of reality, not records it, constructs it, then the raw material of that construction matters enormously. And the raw material includes not just incoming sensory data, but your memories, your expectations, your emotional state, your history, your beliefs, and the context you are standing in when the signal arrives. Consider a classic study involving wine. The two groups of participants were given the same wine, identical, from the same bottle, but told different things about its price. One group was told it cost approximately $10. The other was told it cost approximately $90. Not only did the $90 group report greater enjoyment, brain scans showed greater activation in the medial orbitofrontal cortex, the region associated with subjective pleasure. The experience was genuinely different, not reported differently. Experienced differently, because the prediction was different. The brain told two different stories about the same molecule, and the body lived in each story as if it were true. Or consider a simpler moment, a sound you cannot quite place. You are in a room, working, and there is a faint noise, a rustling maybe, or a creak. It sits at the edge of awareness. You are not sure if you heard it or imagined it. Then someone else in the room says, "Did you hear that?" And suddenly the sound becomes vivid, real, unmistakable. The sensory signal was identical, but the prediction changed. Your brain, now equipped with external confirmation, decided to process the signal, to let it through from the noise into experience. This is why you can read a sentence with half the letters missing and understand it perfectly. Your brain fills in the gaps with prediction. This is why magic tricks work on intelligent people. The brain's model of how objects move in space is so confident that it processes the trick according to its expectations, rather than what actually happened. And this is where the frontier of this science begins to press against medicine, against healing, against the lived experience of pain and suffering. Because if perception is prediction, if what you experience is partly a construction built from what you expect to experience, then changing what you expect can, under the right conditions, change what you feel. This is not mysticism. This is mechanism. In one landmark study, researchers gave participants cold water and warm water, but labeled them backward. Participants who believed they were holding warm water reported warmth. Participants who believed they were holding cold water reported cold. The actual temperature of the water produced a muted signal compared to the expectation. The brain's forecast overrode the data. Consider what this means. Your skin is reporting one thing. Your brain is deciding to experience something else. Not because of confusion, because of architecture. The prediction was strong enough, and the sensory signal was uncertain enough that the prior belief won. And yet, and this is the part that makes researchers lean forward in their chairs, expectations are not fixed, they are learned. Which means they can be unlearned, they can be shifted, they can be trained. Over a lifetime, repeated experiences build stronger predictions. The person who grew up in a household where illness was catastrophized learns to predict danger from bodily sensations. The person who practiced meditation for a decade learns to predict that difficult experiences pass. The person who was told repeatedly that exercise would hurt learns to amplify the sensory signal of physical effort into something larger than it actually is. But new experiences can update the model. New information, delivered in the right way, at the right moment, can revise the forecast. And when the forecast changes, the experience changes. Not as a trick, not as a distraction, but as a genuine reorganization of the construction process. This is the invisible editor at work. Right now, as you listen, your brain is editing. It is smoothing the gaps, filling in the silences, building a continuous experience from a discontinuous stream of signals. It is deciding what matters and what does not. It is choosing, below the level of your awareness, faster than you can follow, what reality looks like tonight. And in the chapters ahead, we will see just how far that editorial power extends. Into pain, into healing, into emotion, into the body's most basic rhythms. The invisible editor does not just shape what you perceive, it shapes who you are. Let that rest for a moment. Breathe. And when you are ready, let us go deeper. Somewhere inside you, right now, there is a pharmacy. It does not have a counter or a fluorescent light or a white-coated technician behind a glass partition. It has no business hours, no insurance forms, no waiting room with old magazines. But it has something more remarkable than any of those things. It has the ability to manufacture compounds of extraordinary power, pain relievers, mood stabilizers, immune modulators, anti-anxiety agents, and release them directly into the bloodstream, on demand, triggered by something as thin and immaterial as a belief. This is not metaphor. This is the placebo effect at its deepest level. And what modern neuroscience has discovered about it is far stranger and far more hopeful than most people know. Let us start with the most startling discovery first. In the early 1970s, a researcher named John Levine conducted an experiment that would eventually reshape how scientists thought about pain, belief, and the body's own chemistry. He gave post-operative dental patients either a real painkiller or a placebo, a sugar pill that contained no active medication whatsoever. The patients who received the placebo still reported meaningful pain relief. That alone was not surprising. Placebo effects had been documented for decades. What Levine did next was the revolution. He gave a third group of patients naloxone, a drug that blocks opioid receptors, the same receptors targeted by morphine. In patients who had received the real painkiller, naloxone eliminated the pain relief, as expected. But in patients who had received the placebo, the sugar pill, naloxone also significantly reduced the relief. It knocked out the placebo effect. The implication was staggering. If blocking opioid receptors eliminated the placebo's effect, then the placebo must have been working by triggering real opioid activity in the brain. The implication was staggering. If blocking opioid receptors eliminated the placebo's effect, then the placebo must have been working by triggering real opioid activity in the brain. The sugar pill was not relieving pain through distraction or wishful thinking. It was commanding the brain to release endogenous opioids, the body's own morphine-like chemicals, in quantities sufficient to measurably reduce suffering. Belief, in the right context, triggers real neurochemistry. The inner pharmacy opens its doors. Subsequent research using brain imaging made this even clearer. The PET scans taken during placebo pain relief showed measurable activation of the same neural circuits activated by actual opioid drugs. The reward pathways lit up. The periaqueductal gray, a brain region that acts as a master control for descending pain suppression, showed increased activity. The brain was not pretending to be in less pain. It was chemically producing less pain. And this, it turns out, is only the beginning of what the inner pharmacy can do. The placebo effect has been documented in conditions far beyond pain. In Parkinson's disease research, sugar pills have triggered measurable releases of dopamine in the basal ganglia, the very neurotransmitter that Parkinson's depletes. In asthma studies, sham inhalers have improved airway function. In depression research, placebos have produced antidepressant responses that activate many of the same brain regions as actual medications. In heart rate and blood pressure studies, inert pills that participants believed were stimulants or sedatives produced corresponding cardiovascular changes. The nervous system is, in a very literal sense, listening for cues about what kind of world it is in. And the cues are far more numerous than you might expect. It is not just the pill, it is the color of the pill. Red and orange pills tend to produce more stimulating effects. Blue and green pills tend to produce more sedating ones. It is the size of the pill. Larger pills tend to work better than smaller ones, and capsules tend to outperform tablets. It is the number of pills. 2 pills tend to work better than 1, even when both contain nothing. It is the manner of the person giving the pill. Warmth, confidence, and eye contact all measurably amplify the response. It is the physical setting. A clinical environment with stethoscopes and equipment activates more healing expectancy than a plain room. The nervous system is reading all of this as context, and context is chemistry. Researchers have come to call this the meaning response, not the placebo response, which implies something fake producing a phantom result, but the meaning response, because it captures what is actually happening. Meaning is being extracted from context and converted into biological change. The white coat means care is coming. The needle means something powerful is entering the body. The ritual means treatment is underway. And the body, having learned these associations over a lifetime, begins to prepare. It starts preparing before the chemical arrives. Hormones shift, immune activity reconfigures, the stomach relaxes, blood flow changes, the descending pain modulatory system sends calming signals down the spinal cord, all because the brain looked at the context and said, "Something helpful is about to happen." This is conditioning. The same mechanism that makes your mouth water before you eat. Because your nervous system learned to pair the smell of food with the bodily preparation for digestion, is at work in the clinical setting. If you have spent a lifetime visiting doctors who helped you, your nervous system has learned to associate clinical environments with relief. When you return to that environment, preparation begins. Conditioning is so powerful that in some experiments, impatients have been conditioned on a real drug, receiving it several times until the body learns to associate it with specific effects, and then switched to a placebo without their knowledge. In many cases, the conditioned response persists. The body keeps responding as if the drug were present, not because it was fooled, but because it learned. And this brings us to one of the most remarkable findings in recent placebo research: open-label placebos. In several well-designed studies, participants were given placebos and told explicitly that the pills contained no active medication, that they were inert, that the researchers were studying the placebo effect, and that the participant might still benefit. No deception. Complete transparency. And yet, a meaningful proportion of participants still reported symptom improvement. They knew they were taking a sugar pill, and the sugar pill still helped. This is not magic. It is conditioning and ritual, operating below the level of conscious belief. The act of taking a pill, the ritual of it, the commitment of opening a bottle and swallowing something on a schedule, is itself a cue that the body has learned to associate with change. Even when the conscious mind knows the pill is empty, the unconscious associative machinery still fires. The inner pharmacy does not require you to be naive. It requires only that you perform the right rituals with enough regularity that the body learns what to expect. But the inner pharmacy has a dark twin. Neuroscientists call it the nocebo effect, from the Latin for "I will harm," as opposed to the placebo's "I will please." And it is, if anything, even more unsettling than its counterpart. The nocebo effect is what happens when expectation of harm creates real harm. In clinical trials, participants who are warned that a placebo might cause headaches report headaches at significantly higher rates than those not given the warning, even though both groups received identical inert pills. Participants warned about nausea experience nausea. Those warned about fatigue experience fatigue. And crucially, in all these cases, brain imaging reveals that it is not merely self-report bias. Actual physiological changes accompany the expectation. Changes in cortisol levels, changes in heart rate variability, changes in the activity of threat processing networks in the brain. The nocebo effect also operates through language. Studies in clinical settings have found that certain phrasings reliably increase the pain experienced during procedures. The classic example, telling a patient this might sting, is associated with greater pain than saying, "You are going to feel some pressure," and then warmth. The word sting activates the brain's pain prediction system. Pressure and warmth paint a different picture, a less threatening one, and the body responds to the story it is told. This is not a reason to withhold information. Honesty remains essential in medicine and in life, but it is a powerful reminder that the same information can be delivered in ways that minimize fear or amplify it, and that fear, once activated, becomes biology. Words are medicine, and like all medicines, they have dosage, side effects, and contraindications. Now, here is what all of this means for the way you move through your own life. The cues you surround yourself with are building your nervous system's expectations. The narratives you tell yourself about your health, your resilience, your capacity to heal. These are not just stories. They are inputs to the prediction machinery, and the prediction machinery uses them when deciding how to configure your body's response to the world. This does not mean positive thinking is a cure. It does not mean belief can override biology at every level, or that suffering is simply a failure of imagination. The placebo effect has real limits. It cannot regrow a severed nerve. It cannot reverse advanced cancer. It cannot do what chemistry alone must do. But within those limits, in the vast territory of how much pain feels like, how rapidly tissue repairs, how ready the immune system stands, how quickly the nervous system calms, there is a real, measurable, biologically meaningful influence of what you expect. The inner pharmacy is real, and you carry it everywhere. Let that thought settle gently. Let your breathing slow. Let your body rest inside that knowledge. Something in you is always working. Something in you already knows how to prepare for healing. And we are only just beginning. There is a nerve in your body that the ancient anatomists named for its wandering nature. They called it the vagus, from the Latin for wanderer, for the rootless, the roaming, the one who cannot stay in a single place. And in naming it this way, they captured something essential about its character. Because the vagus nerve does not stay in one place. It descends from the brainstem like a river, branching into tributaries, reaching into the throat, the lungs, the heart, the liver, the stomach, the intestines. It is the longest cranial nerve in the body. It is also, by a significant margin, the most philosophically interesting. Because the vagus nerve is the highway on which your emotional life and your biological life meet. This is not metaphor, and it is not a loose analogy. It is anatomy. When you feel a wave of anxiety that tightens your chest, a physical cable is carrying that signal. When fear turns your stomach, nerve fibers are the medium of that translation. When a tender moment of connection softens the muscles around your heart, the vagus is the pathway through which social safety becomes physiological calm, and the traffic on this highway runs in both directions. About 80% of the fibers in the vagus nerve are afferent, meaning they carry information upward, from the organs to the brain. Only 20% carry commands downward from the brain to the body. This ratio surprises people when they first encounter it. we tend to think of the brain as issuing instructions and the body as following them. But the vagus nerve, in its architecture, suggests something different. It suggests that the body is doing at least as much talking as listening. The body is doing at least as much talking as listening. The state of your gut, your heart, your lungs is constantly transmitting its status report upward, and that report shapes the emotional texture of your experience. That the state of your gut, your heart, your lungs is constantly transmitting its status report upward, and that this report shapes, profoundly, continuously, the emotional texture of your experience. Interoception is the word scientists use for this inner sensing, the perception of the body's own state. And interoceptive signals from the vagus contribute not just to your sense of physical comfort, but to your mood, your sense of safety, your tolerance for uncertainty, your emotional resilience. Let us trace the vagus from top to bottom, stopping at each organ to hear what it has to say. We begin in the throat, where vagal branches innervate the larynx and pharynx, the structures of voice and swallowing. When anxiety rises, these muscles can tighten, making the voice higher or thinner than its resting tone, making swallowing feel effortful or strange. When you are moved by music or tenderness, the throat can loosen with something that almost resembles tears. The vagus is the reason voice tone can communicate emotional safety before words have been decoded. Infants respond to vagal prosody, the musical quality of a calm voice, before they understand a single word. Moving down into the lungs, the vagus nerve monitors the stretch of the airways with each breath. When you exhale slowly, stretching the exhalation beyond its usual length, pulmonary stretch receptors send a signal upward through the vagus, triggering a reflex decrease in heart rate and a shift in autonomic balance toward the parasympathetic, the calm and connect state. This is the physiological reason slow breathing works, not because it is relaxing by convention, because the mechanical act of a long exhalation physically presses a biological brake pedal whose cable runs through the vagus nerve. This is why singers, who must learn to extend their exhalations over musical phrases, often develop what researchers call high vagal tone, a pattern of cardiac and autonomic activity associated with resilience, emotional regulation, and social attunement. The training that allows them to hold a note teaches the nervous system, over years, to rest longer in the parasympathetic state. And this is why breath control is one of the few portals through which the conscious mind can directly access and modify the autonomic nervous system. The breath is the bridge. The vagus is the architecture of the bridge. Now to the heart. The vagal influence on cardiac function is profound and specific. Parasympathetic vagal fibers wrap directly around the sinoatrial node, the heart's natural pacemaker. When vagal activity is high, these fibers slow the heart rate. When vagal activity drops, in the presence of stress or threat, the heart rate climbs. The oscillation between these states across each breath cycle creates what researchers measure as heart rate variability, the subtle speeding up and slowing down that occurs with inhalation and exhalation. Higher heart rate variability is associated with emotional flexibility, cognitive performance, and physical health. Lower heart rate variability is associated with chronic stress, inflammation, and cardiovascular risk. Heart rate variability is, in a sense, a readout of how freely the vagus is functioning, how well the nervous system can move between states of alert attention and restful recovery. Some researchers believe that activities that increase heart rate variability, slow-paced breathing, meditation, cold water immersion, even chanting and singing, may be genuinely protective over time, not through some mystical mechanism, but through a very concrete pathway of strengthening vagal tone, improving the nervous system's flexibility, and reducing the inflammatory signaling that chronic sympathetic dominance produces. Further down, or into the stomach, the vagus nerve monitors hunger, fullness, nausea, and the mechanical state of the gastric wall. It regulates the acid secretion and the rate of gastric emptying. When you feel the stomach-dropping sensation of sudden fear, that is partly vagal. The rapid shift in autonomic tone, changing blood flow and muscle tension throughout the gut. When nausea follows anxiety, when the body's threat response turns the stomach, the vagus is the road that message travels. This is not incidental to the experience of emotion. This is part of the experience of emotion. When you feel afraid, you feel it in your stomach, not as a metaphor, but as a literal visceral event. The emotion is not located only in your brain. It is distributed through your body, and the body's state feeds back upward through the vagus, intensifying or modifying the quality of the felt experience. And then, at the far end of the vagus highway, the intestines. Here, the story deepens even further, because in the gut there are approximately 500 million neurons, more than in the spinal cord. They form what researchers have called the enteric nervous system, a mesh of nerve cells that can coordinate digestion, sense the chemical composition of gut contents, communicate with immune cells, and generate and respond to neurotransmitters, including serotonin, dopamine, and GABA. About 90% of the body's serotonin is produced not in the brain, but in the gut. This enteric network is not, strictly speaking, a thinking machine. It does not have beliefs or solve problems, but it is far more sophisticated than a simple relay station. It can operate independently of the brain, digesting a meal even when vagal connections are severed, and it can influence mood, anxiety, and cognitive function through signals that travel up the vagus and through the circulation. When you feel what is often called a gut feeling, an intuitive sense about a situation that arrives before you have thought it through, there is a reasonable possibility that what you are feeling is genuine, bottom-up information, not wisdom, not prophecy, but biological signal processed quickly and holistically by a nervous system with far more reach into the body than we tend to imagine. Now, here is what all this means for the mind-body story. The vagus nerve is not a passive observer. It is an active participant in the regulation of mood, pain, immune function, and the felt sense of safety or threat. Its tone, the ease and flexibility with which it modulates between states, is trainable, and the tools that train it are, in many cases, tools we already possess. Slow, paced breathing strengthens vagal tone. So does social engagement, conversations characterized by warmth and attunement, facial expressions of care and recognition, the prosody of a voice that says you are safe. So does cold water on the face, which activates what researchers call the diving reflex, a rapid parasympathetic shift that can slow a racing heart within a minute. So does singing. So does certain styles of meditation. So, over longer timescales, does regular exercise. When you sit with someone you love and the conversation flows easily. When you feel held and understood and not alone. Part of what is happening physiologically is vagal activation. The social nervous system is a real system. Connection is not just a feeling. It is a state of the nervous system that changes what the immune system does, changes what the heart does, changes how the brain processes incoming signals. And when you are isolated, when safety signals are absent and threat feels constant, vagal tone drops. The nervous system settles into a chronic defensive posture, and in that posture, everything is slightly harder. Sleep, digestion, thinking, healing. You are a social animal in a biological sense that goes much deeper than preference or personality. Your nervous system is built to expect connection, and in its presence, it works better. Breathe that in. Let the exhale be slow. Long enough that your lungs send their signal up the vagal fiber. Long enough for the heart to receive the message that the world, right now, is safe enough. And then let us continue. What does it mean for something to belong to you? At first, the question seems almost silly. Your hand is yours because it is attached to your wrist, which is attached to your arm, which is attached to your body. Ownership, in the physical sense, seems self-evident. But the nervous system does not work from the outside in. It works from the inside out. And from the inside, from the perspective of the brain, ownership is not a physical fact. It is a continuously maintained belief. A belief, as it turns out, that can be updated. In 1995, a series of experiments known informally as the rubber hand illusion demonstrated this in a way that startled even the researchers conducting it. A participant sits at a table with their real hand hidden from view, and a realistic rubber hand placed in front of them in roughly the same position as their hidden one. An experimenter simultaneously strokes both the real hand and the rubber hand with a small brush. Same rhythm, same motion, same pressure. After only a few minutes, something remarkable happens. Most participants begin to report that they can feel the strokes on the rubber hand, not as a distant or detached sensation, as their sensation, as if the rubber hand were theirs. And when the experimenter suddenly threatens the rubber hand, moving toward it quickly with a hammer or a pen, participants flinch. Galvanic skin response sensors show a spike in arousal. The body treats the rubber hand as the body. The boundary of the self, it turns out, is not fixed by skin. It is negotiated, moment by moment, by the brain's predictive model of what belongs to it. What has happened is that the brain has updated its model of the self. It combined three streams of information: the visual evidence of a hand in front of it, the touch sensations from the real hand, and the synchrony between them, and reached the only conclusion that made computational sense. That hand is mine. The boundary of the self is not fixed by skin. It is negotiated, moment by moment, by the brain's predictive model of what belongs to it. This discovery opened a door that has led, in subsequent decades, into territories of enormous clinical significance, most dramatically in the world of phantom limb pain. When a limb is amputated, the brain does not immediately dissolve the neural representation of that limb. The body map, The somatosensory cortex's detailed representation of every surface and region of the body maintains its existing structure and continues to generate the subjective experience of the limb being present. This is why so many amputees report vivid phantom sensations, the feeling of fingers they no longer have, the sense of a foot resting on a floor that cannot reach it, the itch in a knee that no longer exists. And in approximately 60 to 80% of amputees, these phantom sensations include pain, sometimes severe, sometimes constant, sometimes described as cramping, burning, twisting, or crushing. Pain in a structure that is no longer physically present. For decades, this was deeply puzzling and deeply distressing to patients who were told, explicitly or implicitly, that the pain could not be real because there was nothing there to hurt. The work of researchers like V.S. Ramachandran changed this. Phantom limb pain, they argued, and the evidence now strongly supports, is precisely as real as any other pain. It is not imaginary. It is the brain's body map generating a pain experience in the absence of the physical structure that map represents. The experience is real. The tissue is absent. Both of these things are simultaneously true. This understanding transforms how we think about pain in general. If the brain can generate intense, localized, convincingly real pain in a limb that does not exist, then pain is clearly not simply a report from damaged tissue transmitted to a passive receiver. Pain is a construction. It is something the brain creates using available information, sensory, contextual, emotional, historical, to produce an experience that serves a biological function, usually protection. Understanding this, researchers devised one of the most elegant and counterintuitive treatments in the history of pain management: mirror therapy. The setup is simple. A mirror is placed vertically along the midline of the patient's body. The intact limb is placed on one side of the mirror, the amputated side on the other. When the patient moves the intact limb, the mirror reflection creates the visual impression of the phantom limb also moving. And for many patients, this works. The brain receives visual confirmation that the missing limb is present and moving freely, is uncramped, untwisted, unbroken. And the phantom pain, sometimes after years, begins to reduce. What the mirror is doing is updating the body map. It is providing the brain with the sensory coherence it has been missing. The brain expected to issue a movement command and receive a matching sensory confirmation. When the limb was amputated, that confirmation ceased. The mismatch, the command with no response, can be interpreted by the brain's protective system as damage, as crisis, as something requiring a pain signal. The mirror fills the gap, the visual system bridges the deficit, and the map slowly reconfigures. This same principle has inspired a generation of virtual reality therapies in which digital prosthetics respond to neural commands, providing visual and sometimes haptic feedback that the brain can use to update its model. The technology is sophisticated, but the underlying idea is simple. The brain needs coherence. When sight, intention, and sensation agree, the alarm often quiets. The self in the brain's architecture is not a given. It is a project, continuously constructed, continuously maintained, and continuously, under the right conditions, renegotiated. And in that renegotiability lies something quietly astonishing. If the sense of self is a model rather than a fact, if it is built from sensory coherence and learned expectation rather than discovered from some fixed inner truth, then it can be rebuilt. It can be expanded. It can be made more flexible, more resilient, more able to withstand disruption. The rubber hand illusion is not just a party trick. It is a window into the architecture of identity itself. And what it reveals is that the boundary between inside and outside, between mine and not mine, between self and world, is drawn not by the facts of physics, but by the ongoing constructive work of the brain. That line can be moved, and moving it, sometimes, is exactly what healing requires. Let your attention soften inward now. Feel the boundary of your body, the places where skin meets air, where weight meets surface. Notice how the brain constructs this sense of location. Notice how quiet and automatic it is. This is the body map at work, doing its job, holding you together. You are safe. You are whole. Let us keep going. Here is a truth that pain science has spent the last 3 decades trying to communicate to the medical establishment, to patients, to anyone who will listen. Pain is not a signal from damaged tissue. It is a decision made by the brain. This is not a philosophical position or a matter of interpretation. It is what the evidence shows. And once you understand it, really understand it, not just as a fact to file away, but as a genuine reorganization of your concept of what pain is, the implications are so large that they tend to take a moment to settle. Let us begin with the evidence. A construction worker is brought to the emergency room. He stepped on a nail that drove straight through his boot and is visible protruding from the top. He is in significant distress. He cannot put weight on the foot. The pain is clearly severe. When the boot is carefully removed, when the nail is finally extracted, the physicians discover that the nail passed cleanly between his toes, barely grazing the skin. The tissue was essentially uninjured. The pain, which was extreme, had no wound to match it. What injured this man? The expectation of injury, the visual evidence of a nail through a boot, the prediction of catastrophic tissue damage. His brain, confronted with that evidence, produced a pain experience entirely appropriate to what it believed had happened, and entirely disproportionate to what had actually occurred. Pain is not a signal from damaged tissue. It is a decision made by the brain, and like all decisions, it can be influenced. Pain, in the modern understanding, is an output of the brain, not an input from the body. It is produced when the brain, having surveyed the available evidence, sensory signals, emotional context, past experience, social environment, attention, and belief, concludes that the body is in danger and that protective action is required. Pain is the alarm, and like all alarms, it can go off when there is a fire, and it can go off when there is not. The technical term for the sensory signals that the body sends toward the brain is nociception. Nociceptive fibers in the tissues respond to mechanical pressure, temperature extremes, and certain chemicals released during inflammation. These signals travel up the spinal cord and are processed by multiple brain regions. But, and this is the crucial point, nociception does not equal pain. Nociception is information. Pain is the brain's interpretation of what that information means. This distinction matters profoundly because it explains phenomena that the old model of pain simply could not account for. Soldiers wounded in combat often report little or no pain until they reach safety. This is not because adrenaline blocks pain signals. The pathways are still active. It is because the brain, performing its cost-benefit analysis in a moment of survival crisis, decides that the alarm would be counterproductive. Pain demands rest. Rest is not an option in combat. The brain suppresses the alarm. Then, hours later in the hospital, the wound that felt like nothing begins to throb. Athletes in competition regularly continue performing with injuries they later discover were severe. Broken bones, torn ligaments, lacerations that required surgery. The context, the competition, the goal. The team changes what the brain decides about the danger level. And on the other side of the ledger, people with no tissue damage, no injury, no detectable pathology, who live with chronic, severe, disabling pain. These are not malingerers. These are people whose brain's threat detection system has become calibrated incorrectly, whose pain alarm has been sensitized, turned up, by a history of stress, injury, fear, or trauma, until it sounds for signals that should not trigger it. This phenomenon is called central sensitization, and understanding it changes everything about how chronic pain is treated. In central sensitization, the nervous system itself, the spinal cord, the brain's processing regions, has undergone changes that lower the threshold at which pain is produced. Normally, innocuous touch can become painful. Normally, mild sensations can become unbearable. The problem is not in the tissues. The problem is in the alarm system's sensitivity setting. What can change central sensitization? Education, for one. When patients with chronic pain learn how pain actually works, when they understand that pain is a brain output, that it does not require ongoing tissue damage, that their pain does not mean their body is still being destroyed, their suffering often reduces. Not because knowledge is anesthetic, but because catastrophizing, the fearful interpretation of pain as evidence of ongoing harm, is one of the most powerful amplifiers of chronic pain. When catastrophizing reduces, the threat value of the pain reduces. And when the threat value reduces, the brain often turns down the alarm. This is one of the most clinically meaningful findings in pain science. The story you tell yourself about your pain shapes how much pain you experience. Graded movement exposure is another tool. In many chronic pain conditions, people develop movement avoidance. They stop doing things that hurt, which makes intuitive sense, but often makes the situation worse. Each avoided movement teaches the nervous system that the movement is dangerous. Gradually, carefully, deliberately returning to movement, with proper guidance, in safe contexts, in amounts that are challenging but manageable, teaches the nervous system the opposite. Safety, tolerability, the possibility of moving without harm. The brain learns pain. The more frequently a pain experience occurs, the more efficiently the neural circuits that produce it become. The pain pathway is like any other learned circuit. Repetition strengthens it, but the brain can also unlearn pain. New experiences of safety, movement, and reduced threat can gradually recalibrate the system. It takes time. It takes consistency. It requires understanding. But the plasticity that allowed the brain to learn the pain state can also allow it to shift out of it. Control matters. In studies of pain tolerance, Participants who are given the ability to stop a painful stimulus, even if they never exercise that ability, consistently report less pain than participants who receive the identical stimulus without control. The sensation is identical. The pain is not. Because the brain's threat assessment includes the question, do I have agency here? When the answer is yes, the alarm volume drops. And meaning, purpose, connection, or direction can raise the threshold at which pain becomes overwhelming. A climber reaching safety, a runner crossing a finish line, a parent comforting a frightened child. In all of these, the motivational context changes the brain's calculus. The alarm volume drops. Pain is still present, but its urgency is reduced by what the movement is for. None of this means that pain is imaginary. Quite the opposite. Pain is one of the most real things a person can experience. Its reality is not diminished by the fact that it is produced by the brain rather than transmitted from tissue. The question of where pain comes from does not change how much it hurts. But understanding where it comes from changes, sometimes radically, what we can do about it. Pain is not a fact. It is a decision. And decisions, even the ones made below awareness, can be influenced. Settle into that. Notice any sensations in your body right now. Notice how they rise and fall, shift and change. Notice how attention alters them. Notice how this moment, quiet, slow, without urgency, changes the texture of the experience. You are the brain, and the brain is always listening. The immune system is often described as the body's army, and like any army, it needs accurate intelligence to function well. It needs to know, where is the threat? How large is it? What kind of resources should be mobilized? Is this a brief skirmish or a prolonged campaign? Should defenses be increased at the perimeter, or should the interior be put on high alert? That intelligence, it turns out, does not come solely from the immune system's own surveillance mechanisms. It comes, in significant part, from the nervous system, from the brain, from the continuous stream of hormonal and neural signals that the mind sends into the body's defensive infrastructure. And here is what happens when those signals are distorted by chronic stress. When the brain perceives threat, and for the purposes of this discussion, threat includes not just physical danger, but psychological stress, the pressure of deadlines, the fear of social rejection, the uncertainty of an unsolved problem, the rumination of a worry that cannot be put down. It activates the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, releasing cortisol into the bloodstream. Cortisol is remarkable. In short bursts, it is profoundly useful. It mobilizes glucose for energy. It sharpens attention. It modulates immune activity in ways that help the body deal with the immediate aftermath of injury or infection. It is, in a real sense, the body's emergency power-up. But cortisol was designed for emergencies, for events that begin, escalate, and end, the predator that appears, the flood that rises, the confrontation that resolves. When cortisol flows continuously, because the stressor is chronic and unresolved, it begins to produce effects that are the opposite of protective. Your state of mind is informing your immune cells, right now, continuously, not through magic, through chemistry, through the long, patient conversation between the brain and the blood. chronically elevated cortisol suppresses certain aspects of immune function, particularly the adaptive immune response that produces antibodies and coordinates targeted attacks on specific pathogens. Studies have documented this in medical students during examination periods, in caregivers providing long-term support to partners with dementia, in individuals going through divorce, in people living in chronically stressful environments. In one particularly striking series of studies, participants who reported higher chronic stress levels showed significantly impaired vaccine responses. Their immune systems mounted weaker antibody production after standard vaccines than their less stressed counterparts. The stress had, in effect, told the immune system that something more urgent was happening, and the immune system redistributed its resources accordingly. Wounds heal more slowly in people under chronic stress. This has been demonstrated in controlled studies where small, standardized wounds are made in participants, and healing rates are tracked over days. The data consistently shows that psychological stress slows the repair process. Cortisol and stress hormones interfere with the inflammatory signaling cascade that orchestrates wound closure, the growth factors that stimulate tissue repair, and the immune coordination required for each phase of healing. And then there is inflammation. Inflammation is one of the immune system's most fundamental responses. In the context of infection or injury, it is essential. It increases blood flow to the affected area, brings immune cells to the site of damage, creates the conditions for repair. But like cortisol, inflammation is meant to be a brief, targeted event. When it becomes chronic, when it burns at a low level throughout the body continuously, it becomes damaging rather than protective. Chronic psychological stress is associated with elevated inflammatory markers, molecules like C-reactive protein, interleukin-6, and tumor necrosis factor alpha, even in the absence of any infection or injury. The immune system is on alert without an enemy to fight. The inflammatory machinery is running without a wound to repair. This matters enormously because chronic inflammation is now recognized as a contributor to conditions that range from cardiovascular disease to type 2 diabetes, from neurodegenerative conditions to depression. The link between psychological stress and physical illness is not a vague intuition. It runs through the measurable chemistry of immune dysregulation. But now, let us go somewhere that the immune research has gone in recent years, somewhere more specific and more striking. Loneliness, not sadness, not depression, though those often accompany it. Loneliness, the subjective experience of social isolation, of feeling disconnected from others, appears to have a specific and significant effect on immune function and inflammatory signaling. Researchers led by Steve Cole at UCLA spent years studying what they called the social regulation of gene expression. They found, in a series of studies using genomic analysis of white blood cells, that people experiencing chronic loneliness showed a distinct pattern of gene activity compared to socially connected people. Specifically, genes involved in inflammatory responses were upregulated, more active than in connected people, and genes involved in antiviral responses were downregulated, less active. The lonely body was, in genomic terms, preparing for violence and pulling back from viral defense. The profile was consistent with an evolutionary calculation. A socially isolated individual is at higher risk of attack from other organisms, but at lower risk of viral transmission from close social contact. The immune system was adjusting its resource allocation based on its read of the social environment. Think about what this means. The immune cell in a lonely person's blood is reading its social context and responding, not through any mystical connection between mind and cell. Through chemistry, through the hormones and neurotransmitters and inflammatory signals that the nervous system broadcasts into the blood, which immune cells then respond to via the receptors on their surface. Social connection is a biological signal. Its presence sends a message to the immune system. Threats are manageable. Allies are present. Resources can be invested in long-term maintenance rather than emergency response. Its absence sends a different message. Danger is elevated. Help is not coming. Prepare for the worst. This helps explain something that epidemiologists have documented for decades. Social isolation is associated with significantly higher mortality rates across a remarkable range of conditions. It is not just that lonely people are unhappy. Their biological regulatory systems, including their immune systems, operate differently, and the reversal of these effects appears to be possible. Studies measuring inflammatory markers before and after social interventions have found measurable reductions in inflammatory signaling. Not dramatic, not overnight, but real and in the expected direction. Connection is medicine, at the level of chemistry, at the level of immune function, at the level of gene expression. Brief relaxation practices, even single sessions of guided mindfulness meditation, have been linked with reduced inflammatory marker levels in some studies. Not always, not uniformly, not across all populations, but consistently enough that the signal is real. Sleep is perhaps the most powerful immune regulator of all. During sleep, the body conducts a remarkable maintenance program. Inflammatory signals are calibrated. Immune cells are redistributed. The processes of cellular repair and immune memory consolidation occur primarily during sleep. Even a single night of poor sleep measurably impairs immune function the following day. Your state of mind is informing your immune cells right now, continuously, not through magic, through chemistry, through the long, patient conversation between the brain and the blood. And in that conversation, you have more than a small role to play. Let your shoulders drop a little further. Let your face relax, the jaw, the forehead, the space behind the eyes. Let the chemical signal of that relaxation begin its quiet journey. Your immune system is listening. And right now, the message it is receiving is that you are safe. There is a moment that appears in emergency room records with a frequency that still surprises the physicians who encounter it. A car is pinned against a telephone pole. A person, often a parent, lifts the car. Not completely, not with ease, but enough. Enough to free a child who would otherwise have died. The vehicle that the person could never, under any ordinary circumstances, move at all. They move it. For a moment. Just enough. And afterward, they often cannot say how. They describe a kind of clarity, an absence of doubt, a total, absolute commitment of every resource the body possesses to a single purpose. And then, usually, The shaking begins. This is the alchemy of movement at its most extreme. It is adrenaline, epinephrine, released from the adrenal glands in quantities that the body reserves for genuine emergencies. Adrenaline drives glucose into the muscles. It dilates the bronchioles, allowing more air into the lungs. It increases cardiac output, pumping more oxygen-rich blood to the tissues that need it. It diverts blood from the gut toward the large muscles of the limbs. It suppresses inflammation and pain signals that would slow or stop action. And it does something to the nervous system's recruitment patterns that appears to allow muscle fibers to be activated with greater synchrony and higher peak force than they can ordinarily achieve. A thought lifts the car. That is mind over matter at its most literal. The result is what physiologists call emergency stress performance, strength that exceeds the normal maximum, speed that exceeds the normal maximum, pain tolerance that exceeds the normal maximum. All of it triggered by a single chemical cascade initiated by a thought, by the perception of catastrophic threat. A thought lifts the car. That is mind over matter at its most literal. And while the mechanism is extraordinary, it is not magical. It is the body's emergency reserve system, accessed through a neurochemical key that threat perception alone can turn. But let us move from the extremity of crisis to something more nuanced and more broadly applicable, the neuroscience of motor skill, and what it tells us about the relationship between mental activity and physical capability. Your brain controls movement through a system of extraordinary complexity. The motor cortex maps the body in exquisite detail, devoting disproportionate neural real estate to the hands and face, the structures whose precise control matters most for the things humans do. When you reach for a glass, the motor cortex fires a cascade of signals downward through the corticospinal tract, across synapses in the spinal cord, out through motor neurons to the muscles of the arm and hand. The movement happens, and simultaneously, the brain is comparing what it expected to happen with what actually happened, adjusting the next movement based on the sensory feedback from the last one. Now here is the extraordinary finding. The simulation, the mental model of movement, can be strengthened without the movement ever occurring. This is mental rehearsal, and its effects on motor performance are real, measurable, and clinically significant. When athletes vividly imagine performing a skill, a tennis serve, a free throw, a gymnastics routine, many of the same motor brain regions activate as during actual performance. The primary motor cortex fires, the supplementary motor area fires. The cerebellum, which fine-tunes movement timing and coordination, shows activity. The pattern is not identical to real movement. It is somewhat muted, but the neural blueprint of the movement is being rehearsed, and the rehearsal matters. In one widely cited study, participants who mentally practiced piano sequences without ever touching the keys showed performance improvements that were measurably better than a control group that received no training. Brain mapping showed that the mental practice group had developed physical changes in the motor cortex representation of the finger movements being imagined. The brain practiced. The fingers never moved. The brain changed anyway. Athletes have integrated this understanding into elite performance culture. Before a race, a high jumper will close their eyes and walk through the approach, the takeoff, the arc, the landing, in vivid detail in real time, recruiting as much sensory specificity as possible. The sound of their spikes on the track, the sensation of the bar approaching, the feeling of their body's rotation. They are not daydreaming, they are training. This works especially well for what researchers call consolidation of motor skill under pressure. When a well-practiced skill is performed under stress, competition, examination, high stakes, the most common error is not failure of the physical skill itself, but failure caused by conscious interference with the skill. The thinking mind tries to manage what the trained mind already knows how to do, and in doing so, it disrupts the automatic pattern. Mental rehearsal, by deepening the automaticity of the skill, can reduce this interference. When the movement has been rehearsed so many times, in so many conditions, that it is deeply familiar, the conscious mind has less reason to intervene, and the skill performs as trained. The same principle that makes mental rehearsal powerful also explains why visualization can support physical recovery from injury. When a limb is immobilized, the motor cortex representation of that limb can begin to shrink. But in several studies, mentally rehearsing movements of the injured limb during immobilization has been shown to slow or reduce this cortical shrinkage, maintaining neural pathways that make the subsequent rehabilitation faster and more complete. The body is still, the brain is training, and the training is real. Now let us return to adrenaline, because the emergency response, as extraordinary as it is, carries a cost that illuminates something important. The acute stress response is designed for short durations. After the emergency passes, the adrenaline should metabolize, the heart rate should return to baseline, the muscles should relax. When this return to baseline does not happen, when the stress system remains activated because the threat is chronic and unresolvable, the physiological emergency mode persists. And emergency mode, sustained indefinitely, is damaging, and one of the most powerful regulators of the stress response, it turns out, is movement itself. Not emergency movement, but rhythmic, moderate, sustained physical activity, the kind that increases heart rate to a comfortable challenge and maintains it there. Running, cycling, swimming, dancing. Not training for extremity, training for regularity. This kind of movement literally completes the biological stress cycle. It provides the physical output that the stress response was designed to produce, the muscular action that the nervous system prepared the body for. And in providing that output, it signals to the system that the emergency has been met and resolved. Cortisol drops, adrenaline metabolizes, heart rate variability increases, inflammatory markers fall. Movement is not just exercise, it is emotional regulation, biochemical reset, neurological maintenance. It is the alchemical process by which the mind's emergency chemistry is converted back into the body's everyday chemistry. Let that knowledge rest comfortably in you. Feel whatever movement your body is making right now, the rise and fall of breath, the small adjustments of posture, the quiet work of the heart. Movement at every scale. Alchemy at every scale. Let us continue. The brain is not trying to see reality. This sounds wrong. It sounds almost offensive to common sense. Of course, the brain is trying to see reality. What else would it be doing? But here is the more accurate statement. The brain is trying to see what is useful. And what is useful, most of the time, is not a perfect, uninterpreted rendering of the physical world. What is useful is a rapid, efficient, actionable model of the world, one that allows behavior to be organized quickly, decisions to be made with enough accuracy to survive, and the enormous computational cost of sensory processing to be kept within biological limits. Optical illusions are beautiful evidence of this. They are not failures of the visual system. They are the visual system working exactly as designed, applying its usual shortcuts and arriving at a wrong answer because the scene has been specifically constructed to exploit those shortcuts. Consider the Miller-Lyer illusion, in which two lines of identical length appear to be different lengths because of the direction of the arrowheads at their ends. The brain uses the arrowhead direction as a depth cue, an indicator of which end of the line is closer to the viewer. In the real world, this interpretation usually produces accurate size estimates. In the illusion, the depth cues are artificially attached to lines of identical length, and the brain applies its algorithm faithfully and arrives at an incorrect result. The fascinating part is not the error. The fascinating part is that you can be shown, explicitly, that the lines are the same length. You can measure them with a ruler right in front of your eyes, and the illusion persists. You know the lines are identical. You still see them as different. Because the visual processing that produces the experience is happening at a level below conscious knowledge, the algorithm runs regardless of what you know. You are not receiving raw reality. You are receiving an interpretation. That interpretation is brilliant, fast, and sometimes fooled on purpose. This is why understanding an illusion does not make it disappear. The shortcut is built into the hardware. Knowledge operates at a different level. During moments of fear or threat, time seems to slow. Many people who have been through accidents, falls, or other sudden dangers report the experience of time extending. Researchers who have studied this have an interesting finding. In most cases, the subjective experience of slowing occurs not during the event, but in the memory of the event. The brain, under high arousal, encodes memories with greater density and detail. When the memory is later retrieved, the richness of detail gives the retrospective impression that more time passed. Motion sickness illustrates a different kind of sensory conflict. The inner ear reports movement through the fluid in the semicircular canals. The eyes report movement through the flow of the visual field. The muscles and joints report body position through proprioceptive signals. These three streams normally agree. When they disagree, when the inner ear feels the rolling of a boat while the eyes see a stable cabin interior, or when the eyes read a book while the body feels the turns of a car, the brain has a problem. Three sensors are reporting three different stories, and the brain, which has learned through evolution that this particular kind of sensory conflict is associated with poisoning, responds by triggering nausea. Looking at the horizon helps because the horizon is a stable visual reference that approximates the inner ear's report of the gravitational vertical. When the visual system and the vestibular system agree, the mismatch resolves and the nausea abates. The lesson is not that the senses are unreliable. They are, in aggregate, remarkably reliable for the purposes they were designed for. The lesson is that reliability comes from agreement. The brain is not measuring reality. It is arbitrating between different measuring devices. When the devices agree, the experience feels certain and clear. When they disagree, the brain must decide which device to trust. Sound perception contains equally revealing shortcuts. The McGurk effect. If you watch a video in which a person's lips are moving to say one syllable, while the audio plays a different syllable, many people hear a third syllable, one that does not correspond to either input, but that represents the brain's compromise. The auditory experience is literally constructed from a synthesis of sound and vision, not from sound alone. You are hearing, partly, with your eyes. The implications of sensory illusions extend beyond novelty. They are clinically meaningful. Pain perception is modulated by visual information. The rubber hand illusion, mirror therapy, virtual reality analgesia. Taste is modulated by color and label. Sound modulates taste. Every sense is, to some degree, constructed from the confluence of all the others. And all of this is happening below the level of deliberate thought. The shortcuts run automatically. The constructions occur without consulting the conscious mind. The experience arrives, vivid, certain, immediate, and what you receive is not the world, but the brain's best model of the world. The model is brilliant, it is fast, it is almost always good enough, and it is sometimes fooled on purpose. And knowing that, really holding that knowledge, can cultivate a particular kind of epistemic humility, a willingness to hold your own perceptions lightly, to ask, is this what is happening, or is this what I expected to happen? Is this what I feel, or is this what my nervous system decided the situation warranted? That question, offered with curiosity rather than anxiety, is one of the most powerful tools the mind has for expanding its range of perception. The illusion does not disappear when you know it is an illusion, but it loses its authority. Rest in that. Let your senses settle. Let the sounds of wherever you are wash through without needing to be resolved into meaning. Just sensation, just construction in process. And on. Somewhere in the history of human neuroscience, a researcher made a mistake. He was studying rat neurons, specifically the motor neurons that fire when a rat performs a reaching action to grasp a piece of food. He had implanted electrodes that would play a sound when these neurons fired, so he could track the activity in real time. And then, while the rat was sitting still, he reached for his own sandwich, and the neurons fired. The rat had not moved, but as the rat watched the researcher perform a reaching action, the neurons responsible for the rat's own reaching behavior activated. This was not a mistake in the equipment. It was the discovery of mirror neurons. Mirror neurons and the broader mirror neuron system fire both when an animal performs an action and when it observes that same action being performed by another. The brain represents others' actions in the same neural substrate it uses to represent its own. In a very real sense, when you watch someone reach for an object, your motor system is simulating that reach. When you watch someone in pain, your pain processing regions partially activate. When you see someone flinch, your own skin tightens. Empathy is not just a feeling, it is a form of simulation. The brain understands what another person is doing or feeling by running an internal representation of it, by almost doing it or feeling it yourself. Empathy, in this view, is not just a feeling, it is a form of simulation. The brain understands what another person is doing or feeling by running an internal representation of it, by almost doing it or feeling it yourself. This is why watching someone scratch an itch makes your own skin prickle. Why seeing graphic injury triggers nausea. Why a good actor's grief can move an audience to tears. And this simulation, this continuous mirroring of others' states, has physiological consequences. When you are in the presence of someone who is frightened, your nervous system picks up their fear. Not always, and not in an unmodulated way, but the signals are there. Voice frequency, posture, facial expression, movement speed. All of these carry information about autonomic state, and all of them are registered by your nervous system and used to calibrate your own state. Safety, too, is contagious. A warm, confident, attentive presence, a person whose autonomic nervous system is in a regulated, open state, sends signals through voice, face, and body that the nervous systems of those around them can detect and respond to. This is what researchers in the polyvagal tradition call co-regulation, the mutual calibration of nervous system states between individuals. Co-regulation is not weak or passive. It is a fundamental biological mechanism that extends across the lifespan. Infants cannot regulate their own nervous systems and depend entirely on external regulation from caregivers. As we develop, we build the capacity for self-regulation, but we never lose the capacity for co-regulation or the deep biological need for it. And in groups, co-regulation scales in ways that produce some of the most remarkable physiological synchrony observable in human beings. Consider choir singing. In a study at the University of Gothenburg, researchers attached monitoring equipment to members of a choir and tracked their heart rates and breathing during rehearsal. What they found was striking. As the choir sang together, particularly when performing structured pieces with regular phrase lengths, the singers' breathing patterns began to synchronize. And because breathing influences heart rate through the vagal mechanism, the synchronized breathing produced synchronized heart rate fluctuations. The group became, briefly but measurably, a single coordinated system. Not metaphorically, physiologically, their hearts were rising and falling together. This synchrony is not unique to choirs. Researchers have documented it in people praying together, meditating in groups, rowing in synchrony, and marching together. In each case, the shared rhythmic activity coordinates breathing, which coordinates autonomic regulation, which coordinates cardiovascular rhythms. The group moves into a state of collective physiological attunement, and in that state, something significant happens to the individuals within it. Stress markers drop, pain tolerance increases, sense of connection increases, mood improves, cortisol levels can fall, endorphins can rise. The feeling of being part of something larger than the individual self appears to have a concrete physiological substrate in this collective co-regulation. Group chanting produces similar effects through a different route. The repetitive, predictable sound structure of chanting gives the nervous system something to anchor to. Uncertainty is a major driver of stress arousal. Predictability is a safety signal. When the brain can anticipate the next sound, the next rhythm, the next breath, it can relax its vigilance. And touch is another dimension of social biology that science has begun to understand with greater specificity. Specialized nerve fibers in the skin, see tactile afferents, respond specifically to slow, warm, gentle, stroking touch. Their activation is associated with reduced cortisol, reduced pain perception, increased feelings of safety and connection. When patients undergoing painful procedures have their hands held by a trusted person, their pain ratings are lower and their stress markers are reduced compared to those going through the same procedure without touch. The holding of a hand is not symbolic support added on top of medicine. It is a biological input to the nervous system's pain and threat modulation systems. Laughter is another social signal with measurable physiological effects. When people laugh together, endorphins are released through a mechanism that appears to involve the social component of shared laughter specifically. Individual laughter produces smaller endorphin effects than group laughter. Endorphins raise pain tolerance, they reduce stress, they create the soft biochemical warmth of social bonding. All of this taken together, the mirror neurons, the co-regulation, the synchronized hearts of choirs, the dedicated nerve fibers for caring touch, the shared endorphin release of laughter, paints a picture of the human organism as fundamentally, inextricably social in its deepest biology. Not just preferentially social, not just behaviorally social, physiologically social. You are not an isolated system that occasionally benefits from interaction with other isolated systems. You are a system that expects, requires, and is continuously shaped by the presence of other systems. Your nervous system is designed to read the nervous systems of those around you. Your inflammatory markers respond to the quality of your social environment. Your immune function is modulated by whether you feel connected or alone. Other people are not the backdrop of your life. They are part of the system that regulates it. And in knowing this, in feeling, even right now, in this quiet moment, the imagined or remembered presence of someone who cares for you, you can feel the nervous system receive that as information, that warmth in the chest, that slight softening of the breath. That is not sentiment. That is biology. Let it do its work. And then let us go to the final chapter. We have traveled far, from the invisible editor writing your reality before you see it, through the inner pharmacy that opens on belief, down the vagus highway into the body's emotional interior. We have sat with phantom limbs and learned that pain is an opinion. We have traced the whispers that stress sends into immune cells and watched adrenaline turn the body into an emergency machine. We have seen how the senses construct rather than record, and how the body becomes most itself in the presence of others. And now we arrive at the question that has been waiting patiently beneath all of it. What can we do with this? The answer, it turns out, is both more and less than people usually hope. More, because the mechanisms are real. The plasticity is real. The brain genuinely does change with use, measurably, structurally, functionally. The white matter that transmits signals between regions can become more efficient with practice. The cortical representations of fingers trained in fine motor skill expand. The hippocampal regions involved in spatial memory grow in those who spend years navigating complex environments. The amygdala becomes less reactive, its alarm quieter, its recovery faster, with sustained mindfulness practice. These are not metaphors. They are anatomical findings, documented in peer-reviewed journals with brain imaging technologies that were unavailable a generation ago. The brain changes through what it does most days, not what happens once, not the peak experience, not the crisis, or the breakthrough, or the revelation. What the brain does most days is what the brain becomes, and it is less than people hope, because plasticity is not magic. The brain changes slowly, and it changes in proportion to the consistency and specificity of the training. A single meditation session does not restructure the prefrontal cortex. One bout of exercise does not permanently rewire the stress response axis. The mind-body connection, as real and as powerful as it is not a shortcut to healing or to human potential. It is a door. But like all doors, it requires work to open, and it opens gradually. What makes the difference between the person who understands these mechanisms and the person who actually benefits from them is almost always the same thing. Repetition, not dramatic intensity, not peak experiences or sudden revelations. Quiet, consistent, daily repetition. The brain changes through what it does most days. This is the most important sentence in neuroscience for the purpose of living. Not what happens once, not the peak experience, not the crisis or the breakthrough or the revelation. What the brain does most days is what the brain becomes. This means that small practices, applied consistently, compound in ways that large sporadic efforts do not. 5 minutes of slow-paced breathing daily builds vagal tone in a way that 1 hour of intensive breathwork on a weekend retreat does not. 10 minutes of mindfulness practice every morning begins to change default mode network activity in ways measurable after 8 weeks. A brief gratitude practice before sleep gradually shifts the brain's nighttime review from threat surveillance to resource recognition. Small, consistent, daily. The future self is built not in moments of inspiration, but in the quiet, daily practice of being the person you intend to become. The nervous system does not distinguish between authentic and practiced. It responds to repetition. It learns what you teach it by doing. There is a concept in pain research called pain reconceptualization, the process by which a person's understanding of pain changes in ways that alter their experience of it. When someone with chronic pain learns what the evidence actually shows, that pain is the brain's protective output, not a direct report of tissue damage, that the alarm can be calibrated, that movement and safety can teach the nervous system a different pattern. This understanding alone, delivered well and absorbed deeply, can begin to shift the pain experience. The story you tell about yourself, about your body, your capacity, your resilience, your future, is not separate from your biology. It is one of the inputs to the system that produces your biology, not the only input, not an override for every other variable, but a real, measurable, physiologically significant input. This does not mean you are responsible for your illness. It does not mean that positive thinking is adequate medicine, or that suffering is a failure of mindset. The biology is real. The genetics are real. The history is real. None of that is erased by understanding the mind-body connection. What is added, what is genuinely added, is the recognition that you are not merely a passive recipient of the body's states. You are also, through attention and practice, and the stories you choose to inhabit, a participant in shaping them, and that participation matters. Consider what you now know. You know that slow exhalation can shift autonomic balance within a single breath cycle. You know that the story you tell about your pain is part of a mechanism that amplifies or reduces it. You know that connection is immune medicine and that loneliness is inflammatory. You know that the brain changes with what you do most days. You know that expectation shapes experience, that ritual creates safety, that meaning reduces perceived effort, and that purpose can raise the threshold at which suffering becomes unbearable. You know that the body is listening to the mind, and that the mind can be trained. This is not a program. It is not a protocol. It is not a list of things to do starting Monday. It is simply an expansion of what is possible, a widening of the territory you did not know you had access to. And it begins, as almost everything meaningful begins, with attention, with noticing, with the willingness to bring curiosity rather than judgment to the experience of being alive in a body that is far more remarkable, far more responsive, and far more connected to your thoughts and beliefs and relationships than you were perhaps taught to believe. The frontier is real, and it is yours. You have been exploring it, perhaps, for years. Every time you breathed deliberately through a difficult moment, every time you chose not to catastrophize, every time you reached for connection instead of isolation, every time you moved your body despite not feeling like it, every time you let the exhalation be long. You have been doing the science. You just did not know it was called that. And so we arrive at the end of this particular wandering. We have moved through 10 rooms of a remarkable house, a house that lives inside you, in the architecture of your nervous system, in the chemistry of your blood, in the long conversation your brain has been having with your body since before you were born. What we have seen again and again in every chapter is a single thread running through the complexity. The boundary between mind and body is not a wall. It is a membrane, permeable, dynamic, sensitive to everything on both sides. Your thoughts become chemistry. Your chemistry becomes immune behavior. Your immune behavior shapes how well you heal, how much pain you feel, how readily you recover. Your breathing changes your heart. Your heart changes your brain. Your brain writes your reality. And you, the you that observes all of this, that can choose where to place attention, that can practice and repeat and gradually reshape the default patterns of the system. You are not a passive observer of this process.